another country Tasmanian church for our 10-minute daily drawing exercise. Now, I thought this would be a good subject because it's relatively simple, but we get the lovely and I think satisfying to draw contrast between the rather plain architecture and the flanking trees on each side. Now, at this point, my intention is to try and show that these trees are not a pair, they're not the same. That the one on the left is possibly more of a fir tree than a pine tree, as I think the one on the right is. But whatever trees they are each quite different. So I want to try and capture that. Now, because they come across over the sides of this tower as well, that's a bit of a complicating factor. So what I'm drawing at the moment is the indent in the tower, not the tower itself, because the trees come across considerably onto that outer band on each side of the tower. And so I'm wanting to preserve the paper, which I do a little more successfully in some parts than others. I'm using a 0.1 millimeter pen for this. I do switch to a 0.3 millimeter pen when I do the trees and the fence down the bottom, just to give me a little more thickness, line thickness, to try and get a little more effect, a little more value out of each hatching line that I do for the trees and for the fence and whatnot. So I get this window done. So you're watching this real time. The first 10.5 minutes, I think, are in real time. And then I switch to double time when I do most of the second tree and I think some of the fence or all of the fence effect as well. But for now, trying to position the top of the tower so I can then come down on each side. Again, I'm trying to remember on each side where the trees are because they come across in different places on each side. And then we have this castellated section on top, which I managed to not draw in the best possible way. What I should have done, because there are, if you like, 3 castellations or 5, depending which way you count the 2 end ones that are joined to the very end higher sections, but there is a center one because there's an odd number. So I should have actually placed that first and then moved outwards on each side. I sort of overcomplicated my drawing of it, which left it not as accurate. Now, the point on the arch there, or the recessed arch, I made too pointy. And with this clock, I did actually intend to come back to this clock. I draw the hands on and a little suggestion of some of the numbers at least, but I had planned to come back and to black it with hatching because the dark clock visually is quite a strong point of attention. And so I had planned to do that, which is why the clock looks a little underdone at the end, because I had intended to do more. So I started with those end pieces, and what I should have done was just drawn the lines up to give me a visual indication of where they were, and then drawn the center one. And I've made everything just too large, and that's the problem. Drawing same size from a photo, right next to the photo, is a good way to make it easier because we can, in our mind or more mechanically, draw lines across horizontally from points of reference in the photo to our paper. So particularly for a fast drawing exercise, it's a good way to get some easy accuracy in some of our proportions and really reducing the more challenging ones to the ones going in the other direction, going across our page rather than up our page. And it just lets us focus on other things at that point. But for now, I'm now just getting a fairly loose dotted and sympathetically drawn edge in for the trees. And by sympathetic, I mean something that I can use but also hide, something that's not going to look like, oh, he's clearly drawn a guideline under the drawing of the outline of the tree, which still shows in some way and pulls away from visually whatever effect has been drawn for the trees or used for the trees. I'm quite surprised how much time has gone by this stage, because somehow I was thinking, oh, this will be quick to draw. There is quite a lot of tree. I draw these trees in a looser style and with perhaps less hatching than I would have done in a more considered drawing. Well, definitely less hatching than I would have done. And I have used overall hatching to represent the darker colour. So I've not only hatched where there were shadows and shade in the canopy, but I've hatched over the whole area. But you'll get to see how I do that shortly. And it's not too hard to imagine continuing that principle a little bit more for another, say, 10 minutes across the drawing and make it darker again, which probably would have been my choice if I'd had more time. But as I've said in a few of these videos now, it is good to push ourselves to stay to the time limit. If we keep saying, oh, well, I can go another 15 minutes today because I've got more time or because I'm enjoying this drawing, while there's nothing wrong with that, we're going to undercut the lessons that we learn and the techniques that we develop by pushing ourselves just to have a time pressure. Particularly if we're not happy with how our drawing style is. Because, well, if nothing changes, nothing changes. And changing the time with which we draw something can be a very helpful way of shaking up how we do it and the results we get. Particularly if we feel that our drawings often look overworked, that there's too much fussiness that ends up looking awkward or wooden or stiff, that our lines look a little too careful in a way that doesn't convey the meaning of what we're seeing. Having to make our lines faster and quicker, and often getting more variety in the sorts of lines and marks that we make can be a really helpful way of seeing options. And particularly if perfectionism is a problem, if fear of mistakes is so constant that it starts to affect our capacity to draw confident lines, then we really should do some time studies. It's probably the best way there is for us to really tackle that head on. Because if we're pushing ourselves for speed, we have another focus that's different to getting everything correct. And if something's not correct, we haven't got time to agonize over it. We've only got time to fix it up in whichever way we can to make it look less obvious as we keep going. That's why I think drawing freehand in pen, if anyone suffers from perfectionism, is a fantastic way to get out of it. And it was one of the outcomes that I had hoped to have with freehand ink drawing, and I've got to say, it really worked, because you just can't maintain the same mindset when you're drawing freehand in ink, and even less so when there are time pressures. We have to develop strategies just to overcome it, to manage it, and do the best we can. And having a different way of thinking put upon us because of the way we've organized our drawing session, as I said, fantastic way to actually stimulate our creativity. Even if we're not in perfectionism or any of those things, it's a great way to stimulate new creativity in new ways, as I said earlier, to be forced to create new types of marks and new techniques. And then we have those in our drawing toolbox for any scene we come across in any time pressure that we do or don't have. So now with this fence, you'll see that I'm mostly going to draw it through negative space. I'm mostly going to create these pickets on the fence by just drawing the shadows. I have decided not to try and draw the slight pattern of thicker and thinner pickets, as much as I think it's a lovely pattern. And I think I would have tried to do it if I'd been drawing, say, a 20, 30-minute drawing. In the time I have, it'll be enough just to do them as a simplified all pickets the same size. We're getting very close now to my 10.5 minutes being up, so my pen will get even faster very shortly. So I've been very gestural with this tree so far, and now we're in double time as I go to the tree on the other side, which looks to me as if it's a fir tree of some type with the wonderful drooping, sagging, hanging habit that the fir needles have. But it is a bit of a challenge now to completely switch over my tree drawing technique from the more upright foliage tree on the right, which I still think, as I said, is some sort of pine, to do different marks to show that this is a different tree. Because, well, I think it's just a good exercise to do. It wouldn't have mattered if I'd done them the same, in the sense of most people won't have ever seen this and won't have any outside knowledge to say, well, that's not the right tree. But it is good not to take the sort of shortcuts of just making everything look the same if we're wanting to improve our drawing skills. It's only when we try things that are a bit harder, even with the time pressure, that we start to discover what options we have for creating this different effect. And with trees, it's, I think, very, very helpful to work at creating different foliage effects and using positive and negative space and all of that. And so I'm also using now hatchwork over the entire left side tree to represent the darker colour, because the contrast between the value of the green of the trees, even the green that's in light, is significantly more than the lights and darks of the stonework of the tower. And I have decided not to try and give any indication of the individual stones of the coursework in this church, because it is very minimal in our reference what we see. We've really got to look, almost a second look, a little more closely to see the stones. And the lines of the tower itself are so simple and plain and create such a nice contrast with the foliage. I didn't want to make the surface of the church tower look fussed or too busy, so that it stays as a contrast. Now, notice with my lines, maybe you can't because I'm going so fast, so I'll tell you that with the fir tree, I'm doing a lot of my hatching lines for the shadows from below and upwards, because we get a different effect at the end of the pen stroke or mark when we go from top to bottom or bottom to top, because when we're flicking up, our end of the line tends to trail off in a finer point than our starting point. Our starting point tends to be, no matter how quickly we try and do it, a little bit wider and thicker and even at times blobbier. And so if we have a mass of these lines all going in the one direction, then the side where the pen flicks off the paper has a lighter, finer, more feathery effect than the end of the lines where we hit the paper, which has a more solid line. And if we don't want any effect at all, it's helpful to reverse which side we start and end on, so that we spread the effect to minimize the effect. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope you found this helpful. Please hit the like button and help me out. You'll find this photo reference on my channel community page if you'd like to have a go drawing this Tasmanian church yourself. There are some great elements to challenge ourselves in, even in a quick gestural daily drawing exercise drawing. But whatever you draw, however you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.